Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. My guest today is David Shapiro. He's a Zen priest in the Clear Mind Zen lineage, which flows through the pioneering Soto Zen priest Sōyū Matsuoka Roshi. He received Dharma Transmission from John Shoji Sorensen Roshi and lives and practices in Reno, Nevada. He's a rehabilitation specialist and has worked with many vulnerable populations, including disabled veterans and disadvantaged teens. He's currently retired, or I believe he calls himself semi-retired. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Uh-huh.
Um, fully retired will be when the breath stops.
Okay. Could you, obviously I want to talk a lot about, your traditional Zen practice and your life growing up and stuff, but could you talk a little bit about the rehabilitation work you did? I'd be curious to kind of dive into that first.
Okay. Well, after many years of working in other fields, I ended up working with juveniles in detention and juveniles in public schools in the Eugene area. And a lot of these adolescents had behavioral issues. They had anger issues. They had the questions that most teens have. So my role was to not just be the coach or not just be the teacher, but to show them through actions and words how they can deal with the situations. Being a teen is extremely difficult. I remember my years. My bottom line in my practice is always, how can I help? And that it refers to kids in trouble, adolescents with psychiatric issues, or to the old woman who needs help opening the door in the grocery store. So I approach life not with questions other than, how can I help? I believe the Buddha would go along with me on that one in terms of avoiding suffering, dealing with pain, dealing with situations. I think if we as humans can come into the situation with, how can I help, that would change the world.
What was the professional modality? Were you like an occupational therapist or a psychotherapist or?
No, I got my master's in what's called recreational therapy. And what that means is working with people after they're discharged from the hospital or facility to help them make the transition back into community life. That implies many types of training, which could include physical therapy, occupational therapy, more often than not, speech and cognitive retraining. Sometimes it dealt with people who had been in car accidents and had head injuries and wanted to relearn how to drive again. Sometimes it would involve being home and learning how to make a meal for yourself. Sometimes it could involve getting back involved with community activities. And to do that, you need to establish some self-esteem, some confidence, some repetition, establish new habits so that that community life will be comfortable for you.
What was the primary kind of input of people to your system? Was it through some of them were disabled veterans, right? So was it through the was it through the Veterans Administration? Was that one of the organizations you worked with?
With the veterans group I'm with right now, it's a local group with veterans who are suffering or dealing with depression, which means coping skills, which means perceptions, which means problem solving. And a lot of these vets had post-traumatic stress. Some are angry with what they went through in the military. And since I also am a veteran and went through some of the things that they went through, and I worked with veterans in Alaska, it felt like a good fit for me to keep me involved and keep me out of trouble here at the house. Again, it's one of those situations where, how can I help?
That's great. When you were, before you were semi-retired, were you working for the government? Were you working for private nonprofit organizations? Like, what was the context of the therapy?
The group that I've worked over 20 years with was called Rehab Without Walls. And that consisted of myself, social worker, psychologist, occupational, physical, and also counseling, psychology.
Hmm.
So as a team, like I worked in hospitals in the same kind of environment, our job was to schedule appointments with the folks we were working with, that would fit into their schedule, that would fit into their endurance levels, that would somehow benefit them to become more independent. The main goal of all rehab, whether you're a doc, a nurse, or a therapist, is to help your people, your group, your individual become more independent.
Hmm. Um, so it sounds like almost like you were a project manager helping them get this different specialized needs and also offering some of the therapy yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, you advocate, you look for what the needs are, what your resources are, what the economics are, what the person is able to do. Um, and each person is an individual, so there's no cut way to deal with each person.
Hmm.
Um, one of the areas where I differ from the other therapies, and a lot of them would sometimes get upset with me, but my modality was like Patch Adams, if you've ever seen that movie with Robin Williams,
Right.
where
Very.
his idea is not just to be a doctor, but to be a person to person and make that connection and build trust. And from that trust relationship, you can become more honest with each other.
Mhm.
Um, that has always been my mode. Sometimes the director said, David, you have to be more clinical. You have to be more precise. You have to be set up distance between yourself and the people you're working with.
Mhm.
Now, I agree with that, but the level of separation, the level of you being the doctor and I being the patient, that can get in the way. There are times and places for that, but with the therapies that I do, I'm out to have fun with these folks. I'm out to help them reestablish a positive idea and sense of living. I've worked with suicidal people, um, and working with those folks who think it might be the end, showing them options, showing them different ways to communicate, to interact, to perceive situations. That's something the other therapists don't do.
Mhm.
They
You
will they'll come in and work on your fingers, or they'll work your arm, or they'll put you on a treadmill. All of these physical things are very important, um, but very few therapists deal with the cognitive, emotional, and social aspect,
the,
um,
the whole person.
of patients, right?
Yeah. And did you ever have the red nose?
No, but I've done things much worse. I would bring spiders that you wind up that would crawl across the bed. I would bring video games. I would bring toys. To one gentleman who was a mechanic who had had a stroke, he was fearful that he wouldn't be able to go back to being a mechanic again. So for therapy, one session, I brought in an old carburetor that I got in a junkyard. I gave him some wrenches and I said, take it apart. In doing that, he's working with grease and grime and metal, but that was something that he had used or done before.
Mhm.
So he's in there taking this carburetor apart in a rehab hospital, a formal rehab hospital. And my supervisor comes in and he says, what the hell are you doing? Because this is not something you normally see in therapy. And I said, this gentleman is a mechanic, is a farmer. He's had a stroke. He wants to be able to work in mechanics again. He needs those fine motor skills. He needs problem solving skills. He needs someone there to help guide him, to show him some directions for problem solving. And my supervisor turned around and walked out
Fair enough.
because I think he realized that therapy isn't just parallel bars, and speech computers and typing and things like that. There's more to helping the person um, get back into things they enjoy.
Mhm. When you would work with troubled teens, where did they come from, and what was your modalities of working with them? If you could generalize it all.
Yeah, I've been working with troubled teens for probably 30 years, from school districts in Eugene and Anchorage. Um, my last position in Anchorage before I left was in a behavioral center, boys and girls from ages of 12 to 15 or 16. Most of these issues that these kids have were family oriented or lack of family orientation. One of the gals I worked with was raped by her stepfather. There was another kid who was abused by, I don't remember if it was his mother or his father, but after a certain point, they struck out. And when they struck back, that's when the police came in, children's services come in, and they put them in a facility to re-educate. Let's use the word re-educate, so that they can be comfortable back in the community without hurting themselves or others.
Hmm.
A lot of these kids, if you read the charts, have been abused, have been homeless, have been living on the streets. But in most cases, it was family oriented.
Hmm.
In terms of modalities, there's two aspects to therapy. One aspect is when you're not doing a session, but you're still interacting with your patients or your kids, uh, going to lunch, out in the yard during sports and athletics, having personal conversations with the person in terms of anger management, how to play well with others, how to use coping skills if you're not as good as the girl next to you. So it's the types of things that parents, I feel, should be teaching their kids, but often are not.
Hmm.
In terms of group sessions, there's a little bit more here.
Okay.
I would do meditation sessions with those who were interested and who volunteered, to go into a quiet room and sit. And during those sessions, I would teach them some basic Zazen, sitting positions, breathing positions, how to hold their head, how to hold their hands, how to be comfortable while sitting. Those were actually pretty good groups, because some of them were able to control their breathing, which in turn controls the thoughts going through their brains, and it mellowed them out a little bit. Whether it did any good in the long run, I'll never know.
Hmm. That's actually a great segue to my next question. And that question is, so you've told me that your primary interest in becoming a Zen priest was engaged Buddhism, bringing Buddhist practices and philosophies and approaches kind of into your therapy work. So I'm
Right.
curious, and you kind of hinted at it there, which was a nice segue for me. But I'm wondering, what other way your Buddhist training and priest training influenced your engaged healing approach, and both from a
Right.
technique perspective and also a philosophical perspective.
It's a short story, but
Okay.
most people who go into formal training are younger.
Hmm.
They have ideas that kind of get rearranged. They hopefully find themselves, before they become ordained,
Hmm.
um, and they have a sense of direction. In most cases, the student then figures out what direction they want to go into. For
Hmm.
example, we have one or two who wanted to go into chaplaincy service. There's some others that have already established themselves as woodworkers, as craftspeople, um, and they use their craft as their form of meditation, of
Hmm.
mindfulness, of being here and now, and not so much working with students.
Hmm.
In my case, I was already doing this with the kids and the disabled 30, 40 years before, I ever went into the formal Zen training.
Hmm.
So my situation is reversed. I had the training, I had the direction, I have my self-awareness. And I thought, well, I've always been interested in Eastern religions. I minored in Asian religions in college.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an opportunity to get into more depth, more formal, what word would I use? I could use education. Um, and the opportunity presented itself on Facebook. And I said, sure, why not?
Mm-hmm. Um, but as far as the actual techniques that you would bring into your work, let's maybe take a hypothetical person. Let's say it's a disabled veteran, and I'm curious, like what modalities and what approaches from Zen you were you able to bring from your priest training into that kind of therapy, if that makes
That's
sense.
that's a hard question because
Mm-hmm.
the priest training can't be separated from all my other earlier experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my particular case, when someone is freaking out in the group or angry or out of control, I suggest that we go to a place in town called Scoopers, where they serve vanilla malt milkshakes.
Mm-hmm.
When I make that suggestion during someone's rant, it kind of throws them off balance.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of, oh,
Like
yeah,
short circuits them.
yeah, well, that kind of sounds like fun. In
Uh-huh.
fact, let's do it as a group, which we've done. So the verbal stuff turns into physical stuff in the community. What that does is help with bonding, help with self-confidence, help with communication. And that person realizes these other folks who are in the same group are there to help.
Mm-hmm.
They're, I mean, you're in that group because you're seeking help, but sometimes in seeking help, the best way to do it, if you can't save yourself, save someone else. I think the Buddha said that. Um,
Right.
so, so it's one of those situations where um, we get together and we find things that are positive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get into how to deal with your heavy duty emotional cognitive problems, although I will do that with certain people up to the point where it would not be considered therapy.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you cross that bridge, there's a difference between helping and there's a difference between being a licensed professional therapist or medical person. There's a line there, and that line can move depending on the person.
Mm-hmm. Great. So now I'd like to transition to I like to, as far as people are comfortable doing so, I like to talk about people, how they grew up, their context, because I think that often informs how they encounter Buddhism and what their motivations are in practicing. So, are you okay to talk a little bit about where you grew up and what your family life was like and so forth?
Where to start on this one, but
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Everything that we all do in our lives and our experience is based on everything that's come before that time.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Philadelphia. Um, I had parents that were more interested in themselves than having a child. Because of that, I became independent by age 7 or 8. I was making my own meals. I
Were you
was,
the only child?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. My parents were both artists. They were both intellectual. I, I think many times they probably did not want to have a child, but above and beyond that, I would spend most of my time as a kid back in the woods near our house. We had the largest municipal park in the world called Fairmount Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned how to fish at age 7. And for the next 40 years, if I could find a stream and quiet and peace, few other humans, um, just the act of fishing is kind of interesting because it requires you to kind of stop your cognitive stuff and focus everything on your line or the rod or the water or the weather or the
Mm-hmm.
temperature. It involves total involvement with your environment. When you do that, you're not thinking about your father making you eat mushrooms for dinner.
Right.
So that part of the youth led to being comfortable by myself, being comfortable not having to say something or think something or do something. it led to a lot of independence. And that lasted till this very day.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that your parents were intellectuals and artists. So would it be safe to assume it was kind of a politically and culturally liberal upbringing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No one in my family on either side for generations has ever voted Republican.
Mm-hmm.
As a young person, I really didn't care about that stuff. It wasn't until I was in the military and the Vietnam War hit and Richard Nixon was in power and all that corruption started hitting and America started dropping bombs on women and children in Vietnam. I became political.
Mm-hmm.
And in that politics, I ended up protesting the war, protesting Nixon, protesting the military. Oh, I can't get that. I'm sorry. Constant. Stop it. Stop it. Excuse me. I'm not interested.
I couldn't tell if that was your phone or your dog for a second.
No, I closed the room and put a danger do not enter sign.
Okay.
Seeing the injustice in what we were doing and protesting it, they didn't like that because I was a serving military person.
Uh-huh.
There were hundreds of us doing the same thing in Europe at the time. I was involved with the peace movement, helping to write an underground newspaper.
And this is while being enlisted.
While being in the military.
Wow.
But the thing is, we had a lawyer working with us in both England and Germany and that whole area, who told us what we could and could not do. So if I was handing out petitions to impeach Nixon, I could do that, but I couldn't be in military clothes and I couldn't be on a military base.
Mm-hmm.
So we would go across the street, have our signs, do all of our stuff. And we were basically hated by the military people who made it their career. We were drafted. The lawyer was drafted. I've worked with officers who were drafted who did not want to be there.
Did you have any religious upbringing at all?
My father would sit home on Sundays and read the New York Times with his headphones on, listening to classical music. My mother would be next door at her mother's house, chatting about whatever. They were not religious at all. But my grandmother, who was Southern Baptist, said, David, you need to get some religion in your soul. So to get me out of the house, my parents shipped me off with my grandmother to the local Baptist church. This was age 6, 7, 8. One Sunday school, the teacher was telling us, well, you don't really need all this other stuff to make these plants grow. You just need to pray to Jesus. And I said, well, the plants,
no water, no nutrients.
Well, they were going against the science. We were learning science in school, and they are throwing Jesus at us. And I was neutral about the whole religion and Jesus thing, and I still am. But they said all you have to do is pray, and I said no, that's bullshit. I didn't use that word when I was 8. There's more to it than that. And they said I had an attitude problem. David, you ask too many questions, and you don't do that if you're a Baptist, especially the Southern Baptists and the fundamentalists. You don't ask questions, you just believe.
And this was in Philadelphia?
This was Philly, 1958. Eisenhower had left office. Kennedy had just come in, and there was the Kennedy assassination. And that's when my political life sort of started. Since then, in terms of politics, I was very active with the Obama campaign. I was the ward captain in our section of Alaska, which basically means coordinating things with the other folks who are going door to door, telephone calls, all that type of stuff. So I was very active for both Obama terms. Since then, I have not really been physically involved, other than, I support the ACLU, I support the Sierra Club, I support the Boys Club, I support the SPCA, any organizations that help other beings, dogs and cats too.
So when they were kind of poo-pooing on science, that kind of killed your interest in Christianity, sounds like, as far as a participant.
No, I wouldn't say that. It eliminated my interest in being in that room with those people, with these thoughts, telling us all we need is in this one book. So it just eliminated my desire to be with these people, because we're going in different directions. So I didn't hold anything against Christianity, and I still don't. I'm still a firm believer in the teachings of Jesus. What I strongly disagree with are the fundamentalists who, in my opinion, have taken the teachings and perverted it, taking it to a literal stage, not a metaphorical stage, and they're hardened and fixed in their ways. Very little compassion for other people, other people's religions, other people's often skin color, other people's social activities. I believe the fundamentalists, what word should I use? They have every right to their opinions, and I have every right to think they're nuts.
Let's say I went to you as a 12-year-old, and then as a 17-year-old, or someone you trusted, to ask you this question, and said, "Do you believe in God?" What do you think your response would be?
Well, my first response is, which God? I really liked Thor. Thor was a cool god because he used to go out and get hammered quite a bit. Some of the Greek female gods, I think, were really cool. The God of the Old Testament, I probably wouldn't have anything to say to him or her. The God of the New Testament either. Most Buddhists and Zen people consider themselves as atheists. But even that has to be explained, because I know there's more than what we can see, feel, and do. But in terms of, is there a big guy somewhere up in heaven sitting on a throne controlling things? I don't buy into that one. I buy into Star Wars and the Emperor and Darth Vader and a sense
Wait,
of...
you're a dark side person? All right.
No, I'm just saying, you can see how these people went in that direction. You can see how Darth Vader started off okay, but as the anger came in, as the frustration came in, just with a normal human being, the dark side starts to take over. Star Wars is a metaphor. In terms of good and evil, how do Zen priests and Zen people deal with it? I would say it's a perspective. What is good for me might not be good for you. So it's a relative perspective projection, that there is some external force out there controlling things. Maybe there is. I don't know. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. Do I care? No.
So having kind of grown up in the 50s and early 60s, did you have any did you have any encounter kind of like beat stuff like Kerouac or early Alan Watts?
My my problem is, while I was in school, high school mostly, I found most of the classes to be extremely boring. So while the teacher was teaching history or English, I would have my history book up, but inside it, I would have a science fiction book that I would be reading while all this other crap was going on. So there was always this interest for the out of the normal, extrasensory, space aliens, cultures on Mars. There was always this input of these possibilities, these fantasies.
Asimov.
Asimov, Clarkey, Jack Vance, Hyken, all of those people. I had over 300 science fiction books by the time I was in 9th grade. So sci-fi opened up a lot, then along the line, some other books came up. One was a book called The Prophet by Gibran, which I read, and I realized I could understand some of it, but not all of it. But it was an amazing book. Then some books by Carl Jung came up, and I started reading those.
What age was this?
I would have been 13, 14.
Really? That's pretty deep reading for a 14-year-old.
15. Well, I was into Joseph Campbell back then. I was into Watts a little bit later. But a lot of the esoteric stuff, a lot of the things relating to psychedelics.
Like Aldous Huxley, stuff like that.
You got it. So that was always kind of like an escape. I think reading can be an escape, but at the same time, it allows me to become involved in the thoughts of these other people. So I'm sharing Clarke's ideas of satellites that he came up with in 1958. 10 years later, we got 10,000 satellites up in the sky. So I think a lot of sci-fi writers and some of the religious people do have the ability, the imagination, to kind of let us know what might be coming down the road.
Did you try psychedelics as a teen or young adult?
Only somewhere over 100 times.
So not really.
Well, smoking pot in the military was almost mandatory. And while the youngsters were smoking the pot, the standard military people were over in the NCO club getting drunk on beer and going home and beating their wives. So I wasn't a drinker, I was a smoker, and it was sort of something to do. It was interesting. It made you laugh. It made you feel good. Why wouldn't you want to go in that direction?
And you tried LSD too?
Oh, more times than you can imagine.
Did was music involved at all with the psychedelics? Did you go to concerts or anything?
Hand in hand. When you're a teenager and you're getting high and you're wanting to party, we would go to any concert that we could that was local. I got to see many great groups of the time. Pink Floyd live for free in London, Jethro Tull, so many groups I couldn't mention them all. And thinking back on all that stuff, it was a sensory experience. It made you feel good. It made you feel part of a group, because when you're in a rock and roll concert, I mean, everyone there is kind of focused on something. So you got brothers and sisters next to you at that moment in time, experiencing our lives. Hey, what could be more fun? But at the same time, I've been to classical concerts too. Eugene Ormandy and Philadelphia Orchestra, I've been to those. So I like some classical music. I like some light jazz. I don't like hip hop. I'm not of that generation or that mindset.
The group thing is interesting. I remember once I was at a San Francisco Giants baseball game. It was the playoffs, so just, and I remember, so they won the game, and this player named Juan Urube, I can't remember his first name, but Urube is his last name, and he'd hit essentially the walk-off hit that won the game, and I remember, like, out of just walking out, everyone was going, "Ooh, Rube, ooh," just the whole audience, the whole stadium.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, and by then I was deep into Zen and, attended many Grateful Dead concerts and stuff. But I remember thinking, like, wow, this is generating group mind. I mean, it really was a vibe bigger than the self. And I found it, and it was palatable in the air. And I found it so fascinating to have experienced in that context, because it really, I've been to a lot of baseball games that didn't necessarily have that one, but that one had it. Like, it just, clearly everyone had come together to one mind. It was really a fascinating phenomenon.
mindfulness by 1,000 people.
Right. Yeah. 60,000 or 40,000, I guess there.
Yeah. Well, what's
Um,
even more impressive than that is if you actually play sports.
right. Yeah. I've gotten it from climbing and whitewater stuff, but I
Same
was
thing.
so bad at baseball and soccer. There was no chance of flow state there.
I've been a softball pitcher since 1958.
Hmm.
Uh, I retired about 6 years ago from a team, men's ASA softball team in Anchorage.
Hmm.
Uh, I would have been 62, 63. Most of the players on my team could have been my grandkids. But for me, sports is like that fly fishing thing. It's being present, it's knowing what's going on around you, it's
Hmm.
focusing on your delivery,
Hmm.
focusing on the batter, focusing on the pitcher, focusing on the damn umpire. All of these things have to kind of be there, but not center,
Right.
not center focus. The focus is on the pitch, the height, the speed. That to me is the moment. That's like what Jordan said. You're in the moment. You're in the flow. There's all kinds of names for that.
Hmm.
You're in the groove. I think that is a large part of what Zen is,
Hmm.
and that could include cooking a meal, arranging a table, sitting in a room meditating. Um, None of those things are separate. They're all part of human life. So why separate them?
Hmm.
Softball pitching for me was Zen.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It was
Uh,
Zen.
so, with all the psychedelic experiences you have, did any of them? And I know these labels are difficult, but did what percentage of would you say were kind of recreational versus kind of like mystical? Like, did it ever cross over to where you felt like you experienced a greater reality, or
Many,
just self
many,
dropping away, or something like that?
many, many times, but with that, the understanding that you were on a substance that is changing your perspective and your
Hmm.
senses, with the realization that yeah, I could make dragons appear if I wanted to.
Hmm.
I could see music coming out of the speakers if I wanted to.
Hmm.
A lot of that was just for stimulation, was for fun.
Hmm.
There was no purpose to it other than uh, experience your senses from another perspective. In terms of trips, most of my experiences were fantastic.
Hmm.
Um, Most were social with other people. Most were experiences I will never forget. Some were experiences that have changed my life, but at the same time, everything I've ever done has changed my life.
Hmm.
I only had one out of about 90 or so trips, and this includes mushrooms, peyote, LSD, psilocybin. We tried them all. That was
Hmm.
what the 60s were about. I had only one bad trip, and that was in London at Royal Albert Hall, watching Black Sabbath,
Oh, really?
watching
Is it
Ozzy.
too dark?
It was demonic.
Yeah. God.
It was satanic. It was the dark of the dark. And something in my brain said, no, this is not me. This is not a direction or experience I want to have.
Interesting.
So I got up and left and wandered around London all night long.
Hmm. So you mentioned you read some Watts. Did you have any? Did you read like DT Suzuki or any other Zen books during that era?
Suzuki came later. I read a few of the Watts books, like many of us Zen folk have.
Hmm.
And the first one that made it big was The Way of Zen. And here's this guy talking about Eastern thought, trying to put it in Western terms,
Hmm.
trying to explain things that are unexplainable. Uh, but his main gift, I believe, is he took some of the concepts and words and changed them to English.
Hmm.
Because what's a turnoff for a lot of people is to go to a Zen gathering and everybody's talking Japanese or chanting the Heart Sutra, not in English or even in English. Um, those things I think are good for the ceremonies, They might be good for an individual to help center, but it's like riding a bike. Once you get it down, once you see what the other side supposedly is,
Hmm.
there's no need to continue with that level of your practice, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And I will get shit thrown at me for saying that
Hmm.
from the formal people, and that's okay. I mean, I accept that. Personally, rather than sitting in a room chanting the Heart Sutra, I would rather be in with a group of veterans helping them deal with their depression.
Hmm. Um, when did you do you remember when you first encountered formal meditation? Speaking of that.
Oh, yeah, easily. Um, Early 70s. Still smoking pot,
Hmm.
still listening to music. Certain music I found, there's certain chords or certain types of music that just made me feel totally different. It was an electricity throughout the body, and that could be with or without the headphones or the pot or the LSD.
Hmm.
But those particular drugs made the experience intensify. Again, the perceptions, the vision, the smell, the sounds, the taste,
Hmm.
all are expanded in such a way that can't be described unless you've tried it yourself.
Hmm.
During that period of reading Watts and still the science fiction and having the headphones on and listening to certain groups, I discovered that all of a sudden there was this weird shit going on in my spine. Um, and it was pleasurable, and I wanted to mess around with it. So I got into my half lotus, focused on nothing, and just let the music take over and become one with the music. There
Hmm.
were certain groups for me: Pink Floyd, Moody Blues, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, a few other groups that hit certain notes that were transcendental.
Hmm.
Once you got to a certain point, you kept on going after the music stopped. I researched that because I was into Asian religions and found that it's called Nada Yoga, Nada.
Hmm.
It's the yoga of sound. It's been around thousands of years, mostly in India, but it's where you focus on the sound, and that could be a gong from a bell. It could be a music tone or pitch. It could be, I won't say birds or nature. It's a transcendental buildup of sound that allows the kundalini, that little serpent in the spine thing, to come up, go through your head, and boom. It's very peaceful.
Hmm.
It's very quiet. It's not Zen-like at all.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's a pleasurable experience. And I still do Nata yoga to this day.
What's your source of sound for that?
Usually Pink Floyd,
Hmm.
Moody Blues, good
Hmm.
set of headphones, no
I
distractions.
can see metal, Pink Floyd metal being in that zone.
That was on there. All the earlier stuff, a
All
lot
the
of the
like
Beatles.
washes of sound and
Well, that's see with Pink Floyd, they layer their music. It's not just one beat and one melody. They'll have a melody, they'll have a sub melody, they'll have something on top of that. Um, so they mix their instruments in such a way that um, I don't know how to describe it other than a pleasant mixture of stew
Hmm.
that creates a warm feeling in the body.
Hmm.
Not Zen, not Zen. It's a different form of yoga.
Hmm.
But that does not mean that we as individuals can't go do our yoga, can't go do our karate, can't do our hatha or jhana or any of the other types of yogas. We can still do all those because they all suggest the same thing.
Hmm.
And that's to become more whole, healthier body, all that kind of shit.
Hmm. When you were in the military, were you ever shipped to a theater of war, or did you stay in
No,
Europe?
luckily, no.
Hmm.
We were at war with the military. I was lucky. I did not get sent to Vietnam. I
Mhm.
was lucky to be stationed in England and see Germany and Turkey and some really neat places.
Mhm.
Uh, I did not like what we were doing. I did not like being part of a organization that was dropping bombs on children.
Mhm.
Uh, so our war was with the military and with the politicians who put us in Vietnam.
Mhm.
So no active duty, no guns.
Mhm. Do you? So you were doing kind of like the Kundalini, like kind of homegrown Kundalini type
Yes.
meditation. Well, did you do any? You mentioned you did some mindfulness meditation with some of your patients. So you must have had some access to that prior to Zen. Is that correct?
Um, Using that word requires a definition.
Okay.
What is mindful? What's
Mhm.
mindful for the Rinzai might not be mindful for the Soto, being
Mhm.
mindful for whatever.
Mhm.
Um, I use that word just as sort of a flashing light. Um, but to me, basically, it means being present, being here now,
Mhm.
being aware of yourself and your environment. Um, that's how I use mindfulness. In
Mhm.
terms of it being a goal, I don't like to use it for that. In terms
Mhm.
of enlightenment or satori
Mhm.
or kensho, all these other Japanese terms, they're needed for part of the study for your education, but in terms of them being goals to seek,
Mhm.
once you seek a goal, in my mind, you've lost it because the goal is there and you are here.
Mhm.
And the idea is to incorporate that goal with your very essence and your very being. And in my case, my goal is how can I help?
Mhm.
I don't use enlightenment as a term.
Mhm.
Why?
Um,
Why?
did you prior to Zen? Did you do any mindfulness style meditation?
Well, the closest I would come is the Nadi yoga, which is the music yoga,
Mhm.
but sometimes without the music and just basically sitting
Mhm.
quietly alone in a comfortable position and watching the thoughts go by.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't delve and get far enough into that to the point where I could stop thoughts.
Mhm.
That was never a goal. And
Mhm.
I shouldn't say stop thoughts, I should say control thoughts
Mhm.
and not let them control you. Um,
Right.
that part of it came with the formal training.
Mhm. Okay, so let's segue to that. So your introduction to formal Zen training was meeting your teacher Shoji online. Is that correct?
Well, that was secondary. Years before, I had another Zen teacher
Okay.
in my religious studies class at the University of Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Reverend Singer. He
Mm-hmm.
was ordained and he had come from the Shasta group to the
Shasta
best.
Abbey.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
while she was still there. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I think it was why because she was there, he left because he was married and there were some issues with that abbot.
Mm-hmm.
And I had him for 2 terms, and we did formal Zazen breathing training.
In
We,
class or outside of class?
yeah, class. Well, we would start the class with questions, with a Dharma talk, and then we would sit for 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh
Um,
wow.
some people were able to do that. Some people were not, and this is where you need a good teacher in my mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, you can sit, you can be quiet, and you can be controlling your breathing, but what's up here uh, is determined by a good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a class situation like that, and you've got 30 different backgrounds coming together, that kind of environment is great for teaching and education and getting you started. But sitting by itself is something I think the individual has to do very often with practice and guidance from someone who is more advanced than they are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you did you
that
largely
opens,
sit in that class? Did you have a daily sitting practice at that time?
not really,
Mm-hmm.
no, because my life was busy with other classes, with um, daily life type stuff. Um, I saw no interest or desire to go live in an ashram or
Mm-hmm.
go stay with the Bhagwan Rajneesh, who was starting his thing out in Oregon.
Mhm.
or to go to India or any of that kind of stuff. I had no desire to do that. I think the people that do have that desire, they're looking outside themselves,
Mhm.
looking for someone, a teacher, a way, a path, whatever. And that's valid to me. It just wasn't me.
Mhm.
No, none of that group stuff for me.
Mhm. Um, and so your next major step in formal Zen practice was meeting Shoji online. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, I would say that once we started and he let me know the ground rules, um, I would explain what was going on, how I was doing, how I was feeling.
Mhm.
Uh, and you do that to the point where you look at each other and you no longer have to explain where you're at.
Mhm.
Um, that has more to do with the flower lesson from Buddha,
Right.
the lotus.
And would you guys meet online for Dokusan, and then you would come to his temple for
Yes.
session? Is that right?
Yes, so I was there a few times,
Mhm.
and it was kind of fun being formal because I'm not a formal type of person. I'm
Mhm.
about as informal as you can get.
Mhm.
So part of those sessions for me was just relinquishing any sense of control,
Mhm.
although I can't really say that. Um, Part of it was fitting into the group. Part of it was meeting certain expectations of what it would take to join the clergy,
Mhm.
which I never had any interest in at all.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a whole different story.
Mhm.
But the training, like I said, unless you're really lucky, you can get to some of these places by yourself. But I've never met anyone that's done it.
Mhm. Did you were you given a curriculum of explicit things to learn, like as part of your priest
Oh,
training?
for 5 years, it was book after book after book.
Mhm.
If you look up above my shoulder there, those top
Mhm.
three rows are all basically Zen, Buddhism, Asian religions. And there's
That were
probably a
assigned to
couple of
you.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and instead of doing the koans like the Rinzai folks do, um, our group does the books, and you read the books, and if you have questions, you ask the questions.
Mhm.
And that's ongoing, and I'm still reading books.
Mhm.
Barbara.
One thing I liked about priest training was, I'd been, a Zen meditator for about 25 years, and it pretty drastically changed my life. But I didn't really understand Buddhism, as weird as that may sound. I
No,
experientially got a lot out of it just from sitting a lot. But, I didn't, like, I couldn't tell you the 12-fold steps, change of causation or anything like that. But priest training actually forced me to learn that kind of stuff. And to my surprise, it actually, I felt like clarified and helped my practice in ways I would
of
not have
course.
expected.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Mhm.
I mean, makes perfect sense. The question
Yeah.
is, how do you utilize that information, that knowledge, that insight after you have it?
You're right. Um, another touch point you have with Buddhism, you moderate two Zen groups on Facebook. Is that correct? Yeah.
Facebook. Yes, I
Uh-huh.
living in Alaska, we lived in a wilderness area. We were quite isolated. I mean, there
Mhm.
was a town nearby and other houses, but we had bear and moose in our
Mhm.
yard and snow and mountains and trout and salmon.
Mhm.
We had no cell phone reception at my house,
Mhm.
which was a blessing because I hate the damn things.
Mhm.
So my contact with the outside world was the internet.
Mhm.
And Facebook gave me an opportunity to chat with people that I'd known for 60 years,
Mhm.
the opportunity to chat with someone who's a writer, someone who is a lawyer now. We went to Penn State together.
Mhm.
So keeping in touch with old friends, but also meeting many new people,
Mhm.
some of them quite fantastic, and some of them are total assholes. That's life. It's called life.
Yeah.
So there was one group. called the Laughing Buddha that I got involved with after the original founder got tired of dealing with all the conflict,
Hmm.
all the intellectual garbage that people were throwing out. So I took over the Laughing Buddha and tried to do that for over 10 years.
Hmm.
And it was an active group. And then Facebook came in, started making some very strange rules, setting up community standards, blocking people when there was no wrong done.
Hmm.
Um, Facebook, in my opinion, started to kill itself maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it's still killing itself.
Hmm.
Um, but it was an access to a live audience.
Hmm.
When you watch TV, you're passive. When you're online like we are now, there's communication, there's sharing, there's uh, all kinds of things going on and going down. So I still love Facebook and the computers.
Hmm.
Uh, I try not to be attached to it, and I don't think I am.
Hmm.
Uh, but I view it as a worldwide connection. In Buddha's time, he had the people in front of him. In our time, we have the whole world in front of us, the whole planet. And people who are interested in Zen or Buddhism can say, "Hey, I live in South Africa. I'd like to join your room."
Hmm.
So the idea of us talking now to people from all over the world, to me, is something that's going to help bring the planet together.
Hmm.
It's
What's the other Facebook group?
pondering every now and then.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
I started that one after realizing that the Laughing Buddha was going in a direction I didn't want to go.
Hmm.
And I wanted a room that was more personal for me. So a lot of the Zen articles, books, music, speakers could put in the files department of that room. So
Hmm.
if someone asks me now, "Well, what do you think about desire? How does Zen deal with desire?" I can go to my files room and I can pull up this excellent expose by a master
Hmm.
on the Zen perspective and view of desire and the Buddhist view of desire, because some people think Buddha said you shouldn't have desires.
Hmm.
What a bunch of shit. He
Hmm.
never said that.
Right.
Um, it's the desires that cause the attachments that cause the suffering.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit more than that main sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be here, be here now. There's
Yeah.
there what does that mean?
Yeah, a lot of people, like, if you look at the Four Noble Truths, the second noble truth is that clinging, or craving causes suffering,
Right,
and they stop there and they fail to notice that. And the third noble truth is the way you get out of that is to let go of the clinging. It doesn't, you stop holding on to the clinging. It does. It's
right.
not. I think that's a subtle point missed on a lot of people.
Well, that and two, people think that it's bad to cling or bad to desire.
Hmm.
And I
Well, you
respond to
can't
that.
help it.
Yeah, well, do you desire to be a good husband? Do you desire to make money to support yourself? Do you cling to your pets and your children? All of those things are clinging and desire, but they don't create suffering.
Right. Or if you're thrown into the deep end of the pool, you're going to desire oxygen pretty quick. You
There
can't
you
help it.
go.
It just comes up.
Well, yeah, there you go. So I put that in another level other than desire. I put that on survival mode.
Uh-huh. Hey, I keep getting these messages that my internet connection's unstable, which usually is a prelude to it dying. So
Okay.
maybe we could wrap up here, and then maybe we could do a part two some point. There were some other things I wanted to get to, but maybe this would be a good stopping point.
Yeah, I'm open for whatever. It's
Okay.
12 o'clock here.
Okay.
Um, I'm open, whatever you feel is the right thing to do.
Great. So in the meantime, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, what would be the best way?
Is it the police? Is it the IRS? Is it
It's your old lieutenant from your army days.
they would type in my name and
Okay.
Facebook would take them to my name, but they'd go to that name
Hmm.
and that account isn't open anymore because Facebook has forced me to change my name 3 times
Okay.
so I could maintain an account.
Hmm.
However, the people that I want to keep in touch with, the old friends in Philly and Eugene,
Hmm.
um, I talk to them on the phone. I connect with them on the computer. If there's someone else that wants to get in touch with me, if they can't do it on Facebook, if they can't do it on Zoom, they can go to one of those websites where you can type in the person's name and pay them $25 and they'll give you their phone number.
All right. So maybe on Facebook, or maybe through the Laughing Buddha or something.
Yeah, I have no reason to hand out my phone number, my address, or any of those things to the wider population because basically there's crazy nut-faced people out there.
Yeah. All right.
So you want to get in touch, pondering every now and then, or the Laughing Buddha, or type my name into the Facebook look for type thing, and they can find me. I use my Buddhist name mostly to keep people away that how do you word this? Very often if you see some Chinese or Japanese name, you think, oh, it's one of those people. I don't want to have anything to do with that type of stuff. So I use that name as a tool to not attract people who I don't want to talk to. The people I do want to talk to, and they say, oh, what does your name mean? What did your teacher, why did they give you that name? And Isurushin basically means healer of body, mind, and there's one other one in there, heart. Healer of body, mind, and heart. So that recognizes there's a connection between those three things, your feelings, your thoughts, and your body. And my job is, how can I help? That's what the name means. I think he chose it wisely.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a great stopping point.
Okay.
All right.
Hope I was of help. And if I'm going to be famous, I need 10% of the royalties. And I'll give you an address where you can send my check.
Sure. Yeah, I had 10% of zeros. Definitely on its way. All
Perfect.
right. Okay. All right.
See you next time then.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.